Welcome to part 3 of our conversation about Toulmin as a method in doing rhetorical criticism. So we're going to continue our exploration of the Toulmin method today. We'll be looking at vocabulary in that second tier that we talked about earlier, and we'll be doing some examples to apply the vocabulary and sort of get a sense of how the Toulmin model is going to unfold if we decide to use it. You remember we started by exploring the is-ought problem. The is-ought problem was that difficulty we have when we face just data and data alone, and we start talking about trying to make decisions. Well, you can't make decisions based on data alone. The data never gets you over to an ought to. The is's never connect to the oughts. And so you have to insert something. And we talked about inserting that moment of making a value judgment. The value judgment was what carried the argument forward. It's what justified or assured an audience that this was a good choice, this ought to. So it's how we get to our ought tos. It's how we get to our shoulds. We make value judgments. Now, we also said that when you look at this model, one of the things you come up with is essentially, it looks a lot like what Toulmin is doing, right? If we think about the ought to as the claim and we think about the is's as the data, then the warrant, that sort of problematic term sticks in there. That's the judgment. That's that aspect that we don't get out of just pure science, pure observation. It's what we're bringing to the data in order to explain and justify our ending. Now, the aspects of Toulmin, the Toulmin model that we looked at last time, the claim, the data, the warrant, those aspects also look like kind of the traditional model that we talked about. If we think about the claim as sort of the thesis over at one end, and the data essentially are the main points at the other end, the reasons for doing things. Well, in that model, we don't really have a space for the warrant exactly, because the old model had the warrant idea that somehow you can create a reasonable justification built right into the process of giving good reasons. So that was an issue that that Toulmin confronted, and he sort of rediscovered that ability. He wasn't the only one or even the first one, but he was one of the group of theorists in rhetoric who rediscovered that ability to connect just data, just pure data, with the claims that we're going to make to get us over to our thesis by highlighting that we're making certain assumptions, we're making certain judgments. Everybody is at one level a rhetorical critic, because everybody is at one level making what we hope are reasonable judgments at some moment, critiquing things and allowing them to open up the possibilities that exist in our ought tos, in our claims in the end. So that's sort of where Toulmin is. He kind of fits in. He's got a couple of loose cannons. This warrant is a little weird, and we're going to have to unpack that a little more. But you can get a sense of where Toulmin is. We looked at those tier 1 terms last time, and what we're going to turn our attention to now are the tier 2 terms in Toulmin. We're going to look at the qualifier, the rebuttal, and the backing. So we'll start with the qualifier. So the qualifiers, when qualifiers appear in a discourse, in an argument, Toulmin wants to pay very close attention to those qualifiers. So what is it that we're supposed to be paying close attention to? Well, we're paying close attention to comments that tell us about the strength of the argument, the power of some aspect of what the rhetor is putting together. So our artifact has been crafted. That's one of the definitions of rhetoric. It's a craft, and we put things together. So it's been put together, it's been crafted in some way, no matter what artifact you're looking at, visual, verbal, architectural, spatial, musical. All of these artifacts are crafted in a way to create a sort of encouragement to move toward that claim, that thesis. So the claim is out there. Language, images, color, space, it's all been crafted by the rhetor to move the audience toward that claim. The qualifier tells us something about where the rhetor is really putting their strongest punches and where they're pulling their punches back a little bit, okay? These are terms, this is vocabulary, these are words that tell us how much confidence the rhetor has in this argument. So basically, these are spaces where you're going to see terms like, you know, the frequent qualifiers you're going to see sometimes, you know, presumably, certainly, maybe, in a lot of cases, roughly, generally, as far as we know right now, okay, with the exception of, in all probability, very likely, these are all qualifiers. They all sort of shade the force of what the rhetor is crafting or presenting. So that's the kind of language you would look at, and you would find. It's called modal language because it gives us a sense of the mode that this term is going to be used. Is this going to be used for a really sharp punch, or is this kind of a little bit more of a pull back kind of statement? So the qualifiers are really important to us. We want to find them. Now, it's important to note that qualifiers aren't bad things, and they don't show that the argument is weak. Usually they strengthen an argument. Now, that's kind of ironic. It's sort of, you know, you got to think that through a little bit. But if a rhetor is careful about the conclusions they draw, if they are telling you this is a very likely scenario, this is the most probable thing that we can figure out. Okay, those qualifiers in there show us that we have a rhetor on our hands who's not kind of fanatical, not kind of crazy, not dealing in absolutes at every single turn. They understand that things are complicated and complex. And so actually the use of qualifiers tends to make an argument stronger. It tends to show that that a rhetor has been very, very reflective and careful in the way they have crafted this artifact. So there's a lot of it that goes on in that way that's helpful to the rhetor. Now, you can get unqualified statements. You know, an unqualified statement is all students need 2 years of foreign language to graduate. Okay, that is an unqualified statement. Okay, you can qualify that statement, except for those students who have passed a competency exam in a foreign language. All students will be required. Okay, except for those, all the rest of them have to be required. Okay, that except for those, that's the kind of thing that you tend, you know, organic produce is healthy. Okay, that's an unqualified statement. Organic produce is generally healthier than produce that was not produced in organic settings. Well, okay, that's a qualified statement. So qualified, unqualified statement, those are the sorts of things you're looking for. When you think about qualifiers, remembering that qualifiers tend to strengthen, or at least they can. They let me qualify. They will often strengthen the argument that's being given. That's important to us. Why do we find that out? We want to find that out because it tells us where the orator, where the rhetor, where the artist of this artifact that you're examining, where they are really focusing their energy and effort, and it shows us where they're being reflective and careful. So that's an important bit of information to have about the artifact that you are examining. And if you use the Toulmin model, that's one of the things to do. Backing is the second of this second tier. Backing is broad, and in some ways Toulmin talks about it as if it were attached only to the warrant. But in other places it works with data as well. All we mean by backing, so let's just generally say backing is essentially any kind of support for the warrant or the data. It's any kind of statement you offer that reinforces, that shows that this is a reasonable position. Backing picks up data, or it picks up the warrant especially, and it talks about it in a way that is going to reinforce it. So it's talk that strengthens the data or the warrant. Now, Toulmin said that this is often where the argument succeeds or fails. If you're trying to get an audience to move in a direction, often you fail or you succeed on the basis of your backing. All right, and that's especially true with warrants. Now, remember, a warrant is something that might be stated or it might just be left implied. Warrants are those things that you assume, and they may be laid out for us, or they may just simply be left kind of hanging because we kind of know them. But often a rhetor will pick up a warrant and they'll begin to talk to you. They'll begin to call attention to the sort of assumption you need to make right now, right? In our example of the child who's being beaten, if I'm going to say to the person next to me, hey, we need to get over there and stop them, you know that's wrong, okay? I've just stated the warrant. We know this is wrong because there's no way you would ever let that happen to one of your kids. Now, that's a statement that follows up. That's a backing that I give to the warrant. I give an example. I give an analogy to the person beside me. You know that's wrong. You'd never want that to happen to one of your kids. Okay, that you'd never want that to happen. That's the backing. Okay, and in that case, the warrant is stated. You know it's wrong. Here's how you know it's wrong. Now, we could give 100 other examples, or we could argue that it's wrong in 1,000 other different ways, but any of them would end up being backing. Does the rhetor make this warrant come alive to the audience? Do they give the audience something to sort of sink their teeth into, to sort of, really get it and go, yeah, absolutely. That's the kind of backing for warrants that Toulmin is concerned about. He wants to see that in a successful, persuasive environment. I don't know if it's fair to say he wants to see that, but in everyday arguments, remember, that's what he's talking about. Toulmin is talking about just the way we settle things on a day-to-day basis in the rough and tumble of real life. In that kind of environment, how well you can provide backing for your warrant is often the make it or break it. So look for, you got to find those warrants. Find the warrant in your artifact and see how well the backing works around that warrant. That's a huge, in many ways, that's the central task that you're going to have if you're going to follow a Toulmin analysis. So that's backing for the warrant. There's also, of course, backing in data. So if I tell you something, if I give you some bit of I give you a reason why you should agree with me, well, then I'm going to give you an example that shows that reason makes sense. If I tell you that, you really ought to take up sailing. Sailing's a lot better than hiking. Why? Well, let me give you some reasons, okay? And maybe I give you the reason that says, well, you're kind of a loner. And when you go out hiking, you're running into people all the time. You don't run into people on a sailboat. It's just you and the boat and the water. So you're the sort of person who would really enjoy the sailing more than you would enjoy the hiking, because it would reinforce that solitude that you love so much. Okay, now there I've given a reason. There's solitude, and I've given some backing. I know you're the sort of person who likes and appreciates solitude. So now I've matched up my data. Sailing will provide solitude with backing, and I know you're the sort of person that would particularly like that. So I've got my data and my backing working there as well. So that's another valuable thing to look at. And one of the things that you're going to, again, in your criticism, you'll focus on that. You'll look to see whether or not the data is backed up very well. All right. Now, backing is often very field dependent, and we've hinted at this term before. Okay, we've talked about field dependency, meaning that there are reasons that make sense in one arena, but they wouldn't work. There'd be inappropriate reasoning in a different arena. So if we raise the question, what's the best way to portray a muscle? How do I best understand a muscle? Okay, if that's our question, how do I best understand a human muscle? Well, a biologist is giving you an answer to that is going to be very different from what artist is going to focus on, right? Because the biologist is going to talk about, the cells and the production of amino or of lactic acids when they get, as you work your muscles, you build up lactic acid, and so the cells have to flush that out, and there has to be oxygenation to replenish the cell. And that's the biological way of the best way to think about a muscle. None of that matters to an artist, right? I mean, an artist thinking about what's the best way to portray a muscle, what's the best way to look at to understand a muscle, a human muscle, they've got other questions. They're going to think about issues of how the light reflects off the muscle. They're going to think about shape. They're going to think about whether or not the muscle indicates something relevant to the theme of their art, right? Is it supposed to show something tense or something tender? Is it supposed to show fear? Are the muscles supposed to be in a kind of fearful mode, or are they supposed to be in an aggressive, kind of threatening mode? That's the artistic question about what to do with a muscle, right? Very different from the biological idea of what's important about a muscle. Both right, okay? So it's not like one of them is right and one of them is wrong. It's just that they work in different fields. And that is one of the reasons Toulmin is so eager to tell you, hey, whether or not an argument works, that's field dependent. Your reasoning depends on the kind of field that you're presenting your claims in. If it's biology, it works one way. If it's painting or drawing, it works a different way. And you got to know the environment that this argument is targeting. Where is it supposed to fall? Because that's going to help you understand the kinds of backing that would be appropriate in that setting. All right, so that's backing. Let's go to the third one, rebuttal. When we talk about rebuttal, we are talking essentially about the limits, the borders, the boundaries of some part of the argument. We especially are talking about the circumstances in which some aspect of the argument may not, or in some cases absolutely will not be true. Okay, that's rebuttal. The circumstances in which some, the claim, often the claim, rebuttals are often associated with the claim. Okay, the conclusion that you're reaching for. And therefore we have to conclude that X is true unless, and that's a rebuttal. Okay, the rebuttal is that unless, that's what you're looking at. That tells us basically where we're going to agree that there will be exceptions. Language that you look for here, unless, as long as, until this happens, if we're able to accomplish, then we'll see this. So that's the kind of language that goes around the rebuttal. Rebuttals are powerful also. Now, we said qualifiers really help an argument because they give the sense that the rhetor has been careful and reflective and knows that not everything applies in every single situation, of course. Well, rebuttals have exactly the same power. They can actually improve an argument dramatically by showing that the rhetor understands the complexity of the moment and understands when this will not apply. And they serve also, and this is one of the things you want to watch out for, okay? Because this is the way a good rhetor will often use rebuttals. A good rhetor will put a rebuttal in, that is to say, a place where I say, unless this happens, or except for the cases when, that sort of language. When you see that language, often what a rhetor is doing is they are sort of crafting a rebuttal that would anticipate an objection to the case they're making. So I want to go to a certain movie, but I know you don't like adventure movies, you like romantic comedies. So I gotta put in a rebuttal in there because I know what objection you're gonna raise. And I put the rebuttal in to answer that objection inside my own discourse, inside my own artifact. Okay, so I anticipate where the objection will come, and I provide a rebuttal to that objection. I provide a way out, or I try to weaken the objection that's coming by saying, I know it, and here's how I'm going to answer it. Well, yeah, sure. If they come with, if our guests arrive with wine, then we don't want to break out the beer, right? Okay, so I can anticipate objections, and I can use that kind of language to sort of fend off objections that might come up. It's important to remember, of course, you can't say everything every time. Okay, nobody can ever. So obviously there will be some rebuttals that will be chosen and some that will be left unspoken, so to speak, or unaddressed. But that's generally the way a rebuttal is going to work. So those are our three terms. We've looked at the qualifier, we've looked at backing, we've looked at rebuttal. That's the second tier. What we want to do now is turn our attention to sort of seeing some of these in action. All right. So we're going to start finding some of the parts in Toulmin's model. We'll start with the claim and data stuff up front, the first tier first, and then we'll expand a little bit. What I'm going to ask you to do as you go forward with this is I'm going to put slides up here for you. And as I put a slide up, I want you to pause the video. You're watching video, pause it. And I want you to work through this, okay? So I'm going to put up a brief argument. You're going to read it. I want you to find the claim and the data in this argument. I want you to identify those. And the way you do that is you pause the video, look over the argument, read it carefully, figure out where the claim is, figure out what the data are, and once you have that, then come back and press play and see how it lines up with the explanations that will follow. All right, so let's get started with that. Here's your first one.